Hello, everyone, and happy Friday. Welcome to this joint production of WION and VOA. I'm Susan Tehrani, coming to you live from New York City. And we start you off with news of a security agreement which happened this week between the United States and Pacific Island nations, which is seen as a key part of America's plans to counter China's territorial expansion. But after 3 years of negotiations, one of those Pacific nations, the Marshall Islands, still has not reached a deal with Washington. The reason? The manner the agreement describes money for compensation from U.S. nuclear testing some 60 years ago. VOA's Jessica Stone reports.
Within days of Washington providing diplomatic recognition for 2 additional Pacific Island nations, the U.S. has failed to extend economic assistance to 3 others. That assistance is part of the Compacts of Free Association, which give Washington exclusive access to large parts of the Pacific Ocean, surrounding Micronesia, Palau, and the Marshall Islands. Funds run out September 30th.
You would have to say that there was mission failure.
Howard Hills negotiated those compacts alongside presidential envoy Ambassador Joseph Yoon. He left his position September 7th. Deals with Micronesia and Palau have been reached while talks with the Marshall Islands have stalled. President David Kabua says the Republic still has one remaining demand.
But the United States must realize that the Marshallese people require that the nuclear issue be addressed.
In an interview with VOA, Hill says the State Department won't let Yoon officially designate the funds as compensation for the effects of American nuclear tests in the Marshalls 60 years ago.
If it were not for the State Department legal position, this could have been done in 2020. It could have been done in 2021. It could have been done in 2022.
The State Department declined to comment on that assertion, but tells VOA that without new funding, Micronesia and the Marshall Islands can use unspent funds or their compact trust funds to meet their budget needs. Palau still has another year of funding. Congresswoman Aumua Imada Rattawagan says she saw firsthand the devastating impact of the nuclear testing on the Marshallese people. She spent part of her childhood in the Marshall Islands when her father was the head of government.
I can remember one time when he had to deliver a young boy, carrying this boy. This boy had all kinds of cancer. He had to deliver this boy to his family. And things like that stick in my mind. I was a teenager then.
Yoon has said publicly that Washington bears a moral and political responsibility to address the impact of nuclear testing. And the MOU signed with the Marshall Islands provides $700 million for a trust fund that could be used for that purpose. But Hill says the State Department legal team has refused to officially designate any funds for nuclear compensation because of broader concerns over legal liability.
Some of the players in this would rather preside over a failure that they control than over a success that they don't control. And success was in reach, and we didn't get there.
In a letter to lawmakers last week, Congresswoman Rattawagan warned that China is waiting for an opening to grow its Pacific presence.
There's another large country just sitting there, keeping their fingers crossed, hoping that this deal fails so they can step right in.
Rattawagan says lawmakers are ready to fund the agreement as soon as one is finally reached. Jessica Stone, VOA News.
Jessica Stone joins us live from the White House in Washington. Hi, Jessica. Well, Congress was supposed to fund this Pacific security deal and all other government services by Saturday at midnight, but lawmakers seem to still be wrangling over the details. What's the latest?
Yeah, we're really getting into a blame game now. Who has the political football last? Because both the House and the Senate are pursuing their own methods of funding the government, but albeit on a temporary basis. For example, the Senate passed a bunch of amendments to a continuing resolution, which is a temporary spending bill that would take funding through the government through November 17th. That is not going to pass in the House. The House is going to, or has already voted last night on a number of amendments just to fund different departments in the U.S. government. That's not going to pass the Senate. And so we're still at a standstill because in large part, Kevin McCarthy, the House Speaker and leader of the Republican caucus in the House, has a very slim majority, and he has a couple of people who continue to say we cannot have any temporary spending. We need to have a long-term spending strategy, and that in and of itself is holding up the conversations on the House side. So they have yet to get a deal. We do not yet see a clear path to getting that government shutdown prevented by way of getting a spending deal. Susan?
And if no deal is reached, we do know that some 4 million federal workers will stop getting paid. But ultimately, who will this government shutdown impact the most?
Well, federal agencies are already giving employees notifications that they may be on the chopping block. There's going to be a few different approaches here. More than half of the 4 million people that are going to be impacted are in the military. They're either troops or personnel that serve the military. There are also civilian employees throughout the government at different agencies. If they are deemed non-essential, they may either be furloughed, meaning asked not to work, or they may be asked to work without pay and then hope for back pay on the other side of this. But that includes people like those are on food stamps, people who get any kind of federal assistance could be impacted. Also, civilian employees include people at Voice of America. So we have a personal connection to this crisis, unfortunately, as well. And then more importantly, perhaps for national security purposes, Border Patrol and other parts of the federal law enforcement structure, the TSA screeners at the airports, they're all likely to be impacted as well, Susan.
All right, well, we'll wait and see what happens. Fingers crossed. Jessica, please stay with me. In the Mexican state of Sonora, which borders the U.S., hundreds of people are reported missing and believed to be victims of violence between rival crime factions. Reporter Ruben Perito joined a group called Caborca Trackers, who go on grim quests to find missing victims. Veronica Villafane narrates the story. But first, a caution to our viewers. This report contains graphic images, and viewer discretion is advised.
A skull with what appears to be a bullet hole lies in the desolate expanse of Mexico's Sonoran Desert. The grim discovery suggests a violent end for this still unidentified person. It's a gruesome task for this search party on a quest to find missing loved ones.
Someone just found these other remains. It's very possible that they are part of the remains of the skulls we found.
Near the skull, they located dozens of human bones. These are devoted members of a collective called the Rastreadoras de Caborca, or Trackers of Caborca, a town in Sonora State. Their agonizing job? To find and identify human remains found in the desert, some of whom are victims of drug cartel violence. Police officers escort the group to ensure their safety. Like others here, group leader Brince Canastillo is driven by personal tragedy. Her brother disappeared nearly 5 years ago.
We come to do these searches with high hopes to find them, to know what happened to them. It's very difficult.
Canastillo says it's hard to deal with conflicting emotions when they find human remains. While the search for that victim has ended, so too has the hope of finding them alive. Relatives say they find strength in the collective, bound by a shared mission, like Brisa Martinez. She says her son, Martin, was kidnapped by a criminal group last year and is still missing.
It's so hard because we don't know where he is, what they did to him, where they left him.
Elvia Noriega is another volunteer. She says her policeman's son was kidnapped last year. His body was found in the desert 100 days after he went missing.
I know what it's like to have a missing son and not know what happened to him. It's torture, the sadness, so many mixed feelings. That's why I'm helping my companions in this search.
Since the Caborca trackers began searching in the Sonoran Desert 4 years ago, they have unearthed more than 100 skeletal remains. Once alerted of a discovery, authorities conduct DNA tests on the remains, a step the families hope will finally bring the closure they so desperately need. For Rubén Pereira in Sonora, Mexico, Veronica Villafane, VOA News.
Okay, Jessica Stone from VOA is still live with us from the White House after that report and seeing it. Jessica, this week, Mexico made a deal with the United States to deport migrants to their home countries and take steps to deter the recent surge in border crossings. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. There is definitely evidence that the numbers of migrants crossing the U.S.-Mexico border is rising. We have reports of about 8,600 migrants crossing in a 24-hour period alone. And the mayor of El Paso, Texas, says that his city, which is right on the border, is, quote, at a breaking point. Mexico has agreed to deport people from about 5 countries in South and Central America back to their home countries if they're passing through Mexico to try to get to the United States. They've also pledged to monitor migrants on trains. But many of these people are fleeing violence in their home country, so it's not clear that they wouldn't try to come back again because what they're trying to escape is pretty significant. Now, on the border, there are 2,500 National Guard troops, and the U.S. government is now prepared to send another 800 active duty personnel. But remember, as we talked about earlier, the shutdown could also impact those border security agents as well.
You know, American immigration policy continues to be such a hot political issue, notably during these presidential races. Every year it's the same. But how do voters rate U.S. President Joe Biden on immigration and border security?
Well, he's getting lower marks now than he got a year ago. For example, an ABC News Washington Post poll this week found 62% of American voters disapprove of Biden's performance on immigration. That's up from 59% in February. And Biden is also getting heat from fellow Democrats, particularly those that run big cities like New York City. Eric Adams there is blaming the federal government for not providing enough resources for people to have food and clothing and shelter in New York City because these governors of Texas and Florida, Greg Abbott of Texas, Ron DeSantis of Florida, both Republicans, have been putting migrants on buses and planes and sending them to major metropolitan areas, asking them to help share the burden. But the mayors and the governors of those areas say to the federal government, look, we can't do this either. We need your help. And so there has been some small efforts by the federal government, in particular in Denver, Colorado. They've sent some FEMA funding from the federal disaster response. But there's definitely more to do because these people are being housed in hotels, sometimes on islands near sewage plants in New York City, for example. So the problem is not just at the border anymore.
Yep. Many cities across the U.S. have become border cities now, unfortunately. VOA's Jessica Stone joining us live from the White House. Thank you so much for that, Jessica, and have a great weekend. And this wraps up our segment of the collaboration between WION and VOA. But don't go away. I'll be right back for WION Live broadcast, New York City, after this short break.